What if I told you there's a community in India whose DNA points back to East Africa? Not in theory, but in reality, through scientific evidence, cultural memory, and living tradition. They are called the Siddis, a group of people who've lived in India for centuries. They speak Indian languages, follow Indian customs, and call the subcontinent home. And yet, when scientists analyzed their DNA, they uncovered something extraordinary. A strong genetic connection to the Bantu-speaking peoples of southeastern Africa, places like Mozambique, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe. How did African ancestry end up so deeply rooted in Indian soil? The answer lies in a forgotten history of maritime trade, colonialism, and forced migration, a history that DNA is now helping to illuminate. Modern genetic studies reveal that the Siddis have preserved 60 to 75% African ancestry, despite living in South Asia for over 200 years. This makes them one of the most genetically unique populations in the entire Indian subcontinent. But this isn't just a story about genes. It's a story about identity, resilience, and belonging. It challenges the way we think about nationality, ethnicity, and the boundaries between continents. So in this video, we're diving deep into the genetic origins of the Siddis, what scientists have discovered, and why their story is more relevant today than ever. Because sometimes, the most surprising histories aren't found in books. They're written in our DNA. The Siddis, also known as Shiite or Habshi, are a little-known ethnic group in India and Pakistan with unmistakable African roots. But despite their distinct features and cultural traces, many people, even within South Asia, know very little about who they are or where they come from. The Siddis are descendants of Bantu-speaking peoples from East and Central Africa. Historical records show that between the 13th and 19th centuries, African men, women, and children were brought to India by various means, some as slaves, others as soldiers, sailors, merchants, or servants. They arrived via Arab traders, Portuguese colonizers, and through the Manila-Africa trade routes that crisscrossed the Indian Ocean. Some Africans were even given important roles in Indian society. A few rose to power as military leaders and regional rulers. One famous figure, Malakamba, was an Ethiopian-born military commander who became a powerful regent in the Deccan Sultanate during the 1600s. Yet despite a few high-profile individuals, the majority of Siddis lived marginalized lives on the fringes of Indian society. Over time, these African migrants settled in different regions, including Gujarat, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, and parts of Pakistan's Makran coast. Today, city populations remain concentrated in rural villages and small communities, often isolated from the mainstream. They speak local Indian languages, follow Hinduism, Islam, or Christianity depending on region, and largely blend into the broader social fabric. And yet, despite generations of cultural integration, they've held onto elements of their African heritage through music, dance, and oral traditions. For years, their story was told only through fragments, folklore, historical guesswork, and scattered colonial records. But now, genetics is confirming what many Siddis always knew deep down, that their ancestry is African, their journey was global, and their identity is complex. Understanding who the Siddis are is the first step in unraveling the scientific mystery behind their surprising genetic origins. For a long time, the African origins of the Siddis were passed down through oral stories and visible in their physical features. But now, genetic science has confirmed their roots in a way that history books never could. Recent studies using autosomal DNA, our overall genetic makeup from both parents, have revealed that Siddis in India and Pakistan carry between 60% and 75% African ancestry. This is an incredibly high percentage, especially considering that most city communities have lived in South Asia for over 2 centuries. The specific DNA markers link the Siddis to Bantu-speaking populations from southeastern Africa, especially in modern-day Mozambique, Tanzania, Malawi, and parts of Zimbabwe. These groups were part of the massive Bantu migration that spread across sub-Saharan Africa thousands of years ago. The connection is not just broad, it's exact. When scientists compared the genetic profiles of Siddis with African populations using tools like principal component analysis and admixture modeling, the results clearly clustered the Siddis with East African Bantu groups, such as the Luya of Kenya. This suggests a direct ancestral line between the Siddis and these African communities. Despite living in India for generations, the Siddi's African genetic signature remains remarkably intact. This is likely because many Siddi communities lived somewhat isolated from the broader population, especially in rural areas. These findings aren't just surprising, they're powerful. They confirm a legacy of African migration that's rarely acknowledged in South Asian history. And they show how genetic research can preserve stories that were nearly forgotten. For the Siddis, this isn't just science, it's ancestral validation. It's proof of a heritage that stretches across continents, carried not just in culture, but in their very DNA. While autosomal DNA gives us a broad picture of ancestry, looking at paternal and maternal lineages through Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, offers deeper clues about the Siddi's origins. Starting with the Y chromosome, which is passed from father to son, researchers found that many Siddi males carry African haplogroups like E1B1A and BM60. These are genetic signatures strongly associated with Bantu-speaking men from sub-Saharan Africa. This confirms a direct paternal link to East and Central African populations. However, in some Siddi communities, particularly in India, there's also evidence of South Asian and Middle Eastern Y DNA haplogroups, indicating some male admixture over time, possibly from local populations or from Arab and Indian traders who historically interacted with African communities. On the maternal side, the story is even more distinct. The Siddi's mitochondrial DNA, inherited only from mothers, shows dominant presence of African haplogroups L0, L2A, and L3, all of which are common in East and Central Africa. These results suggest that a large proportion of the women in the early Siddi population were of African descent, and that their maternal lines have remained largely unbroken over centuries. Interestingly, the African signature is stronger on the maternal side than the paternal. This could reflect the historical context in which African women were more likely to be isolated within their communities, while African men may have interacted more with local populations through trade, military service, or labor. Together, these lineages help us reconstruct the Siddi family tree. They tell us that Siddis are not just culturally African descended, they are genetically rooted in Africa, with deep, traceable links through both their fathers and mothers. Although the Siddis have retained a significant portion of their African ancestry, they didn't remain genetically isolated. Over the centuries, they have undergone a process known as admixture, the blending of genes from different populations. In the case of the Siddis, this blending occurred primarily with local Indian populations, and to a lesser extent with Middle Eastern and European lineages. Genetic studies estimate that the admixture between African Siddis and Indian populations began around 200 years ago, or approximately 8 generations back. This timeline aligns with the late Mughal and early British colonial periods, when African communities had already been living in India for generations and were increasingly integrated into local society. Admixture rates vary between regions. In areas like Gujarat and Hyderabad, where Siddis lived closer to Indian communities, the percentage of Indian ancestry is slightly higher. In contrast, in more remote areas like the forests of Karnataka, Siddis remained relatively isolated, preserving a purer African genetic profile. This blending is also visible in their genomic structure. Most Siddis today have between 25% and 40% South Asian ancestry, depending on region and community history. Some also show minor signals of West Asian or Middle Eastern DNA, which could reflect historical interactions with Arab traders and Islamic rulers. But what's truly fascinating is that, despite this blending, the core African genetic signature remains dominant. This suggests that Siddi communities, while culturally adaptable, have maintained strong internal cohesion, marrying within their own groups and preserving both cultural and genetic heritage. This pattern of genetic blending with local populations is similar to other African diaspora communities around the world. What sets the Siddis apart, however, is their geographic location and unique historical pathway. Unlike Afro-Caribbean or African-American populations, who were brought across the Atlantic in one of history's most brutal forced migrations. The Siddis arrived across the Indian Ocean through a more complex mix of trade, warfare, and colonization. The Siddi genome, then, is a living archive, a map of human movement, survival, and adaptation. It reflects not only African origins, but also the story of how a people became part of India, while still carrying the unmistakable imprint of where they came from. Despite centuries in South Asia, the Siddis have managed to preserve unique aspects of their African cultural heritage, blending them seamlessly with local Indian traditions. Their way of life is a rich cultural mosaic, a reflection of both ancestral memory and regional adaptation. One of the most striking elements of Siddi culture is their music and dance. In Karnataka and Gujarat, the Siddis perform a vibrant dance known as Goma, which features energetic drumming, chanting, and movement patterns that clearly echo East African Bantu rhythms. These performances are often held during religious festivals and community gatherings and serve as a way to keep oral histories alive. Musical instruments like the ngoma, drum, and call and response singing styles also link them to their African roots. Many of these traditions have no direct parallel in Indian folk culture, further highlighting their distinct origin. Religiously, the Siddis are incredibly diverse. Depending on the region, they practice Islam, Hinduism, or Christianity, often blending African spiritual elements with local customs. In some communities, rituals to honor ancestral spirits are still observed, practices that resonate with African cosmologies more than South Asian religious norms. Their language and dress, however, have become almost entirely Indian. Siddis typically speak the regional language, whether it's Gujarati, Kannada, Marathi, or Urdu, and wear local clothing styles. This linguistic and visual adaptation has helped them integrate socially, even if they remain culturally distinct. Today, Siddi communities continue to pass down folklore, songs, and dance forms that preserve their African identity. Even in small rural villages, there is a conscious effort, especially among the elders, to teach younger generations about their unique history. In many ways, Siddi culture is not about choosing between Africa or India. It's about preserving both and thriving in the space in between. While the Siddi people have a rich cultural heritage and a remarkable genetic history, their daily reality in modern India is far less celebrated. Despite having lived in the subcontinent for centuries, Siddis are often seen as outsiders, viewed through the lens of their African appearance rather than their Indian roots. One of the most persistent challenges Siddis face is social invisibility. In many parts of India, people are simply unaware that a community of African descendants exists within the country. This lack of recognition translates into limited political representation, economic marginalization, and stereotyping. Siddis often live in remote or underdeveloped villages, where access to quality education, healthcare, and employment is limited. Discrimination based on skin color, colorism, adds another layer of difficulty. Many Siddis report being subjected to racial slurs, treated as foreigners, or assumed to be recent African immigrants, despite having Indian citizenship for generations. However, in recent years, things are slowly changing. Activists, scholars, and Siddi youth have begun to reclaim their narrative, highlighting their contributions, demanding inclusion, and celebrating their heritage. In Karnataka, some Siddi families have benefited from scheduled tribe status, which grants certain legal protections and access to affirmative action in education and government jobs. Still, progress is uneven and slow. The question of identity is a complex one for the Siddis. Are they African? Are they Indian? In truth, they are both and more. They are a living example of diaspora identity, shaped by history, but still evolving. Their story challenges narrow definitions of what it means to be Indian, reminding us that national identity can be multi-layered and inclusive. For the Siddi community, embracing their African ancestry while asserting their Indian identity isn't a contradiction. It's a powerful statement of resilience and belonging in a world that often asks people to choose one or the other. The story of the Siddis is more than a historical curiosity. It's a powerful reminder of how human migration, survival, and identity are woven together across continents and centuries. Their DNA tells a tale of journeys that many never expected, linking Africa and India in ways textbooks rarely explain. Understanding the Siddis challenges narrow ideas about ethnicity and nationality. It shows us that identity isn't fixed or simple. It's a dynamic mix of history, culture, and biology. The Siddis prove that people can carry multiple heritages at once, and that these heritages shape who they are today. Their survival and resilience also highlight the strength of marginalized communities who maintain their culture and dignity despite discrimination and hardship. The Siddis remind us that histories of migration, whether forced or voluntary, have created the diverse societies we live in now. As science continues to explore human genetics, stories like the Siddis help us rethink our connections to the past and each other. They encourage us to celebrate diversity, understand complexity, and embrace a broader, more inclusive view of what it means to belong. In the end, the Siddi story is a testament to the richness of human history and a call to honor all the threads that make up the fabric of our shared humanity.